The last step to completing our block is to render it. Right now, I'm looking at the block we just created. I've filled in all the fields and updated the post. If I were to view the post on the front end, then you'll see it displays just fine. Something you'll notice is that the styles are completely different from the styles used in the editor. In most cases, you want this to be consistent. I'll show you how to load styles for Gutenberg, but for now you can ignore this. Right now, the problem we face is Gutenberg is unable to render the block again after a page refresh. What does that mean? First, we'll have to understand how Gutenberg handles our content. The Gutenberg lifestyle is straightforward, but there's a lot that goes into it. This diagram is grossly oversimplified. Whenever you're writing content on the Gutenberg editor, the edit function is constantly called to update everything. The edit function will always return processed HTML, which will then be rendered onto the editor. Things change when the user clicks on Publish or Update. The Save function is called, which does something similar to the edit function. It will run any code inside and return the processed HTML. This time, the processed HTML is sent to the database. I currently have Heidi opened. All posts are saved in the WP Posts table. If you scroll down to the bottom, you should find the recipe post you created. Just in case you can't find it, you can go back to the browser and look at the URL. The post ID is set under the post query here. Once you have the post ID, you can switch back to Heidi and look for it. Under the Post Content column, you will find the content saved. As you can see, there is no JavaScript or JSX. This is pure HTML. Right now, we only have one block. These comments prove that fact. WordPress will take the time to surround your blocks with comments that contain the name. These comments serve a purpose. I'll explain in just a moment, but let's look at the front end again. If you were to view the HTML for the post, you'll see the comments no longer appear. Before content is displayed, the Gutenberg comments are removed as they're not necessary. Alright, so what is the purpose of these comments? Later down the road, you may want to edit a post. When you do so, Gutenberg will load the content from the database. However, here's the problem. The content is pure HTML. Gutenberg has to take the time to break down your content into blocks again. The comments assist with that by telling Gutenberg which pieces of HTML belong to which block. In this example, Gutenberg will be able to understand that this HTML here belongs to the recipe block. Simple enough so far. Here's where the complication begins. Gutenberg doesn't know which piece of text belongs to which attribute. It's obvious to us that this piece of text is for ingredients and this other piece of text is for cooking time. However, Gutenberg doesn't know that. For the most part, Gutenberg doesn't care what the HTML looks like. It's looking for the attribute data. To recap, it loads the HTML from the database. It will then convert the HTML into blocks. It will then look for the attributes. Once it grabs the attributes, it will then use those values and store it for the block. The edit function will then be triggered so that it can render the HTML on the editor itself. If it's unable to find certain attributes, then it'll assume the content was changed outside of its scope. The question now is, how do we get Gutenberg to identify which piece of text belongs to which attribute? Before I answer that, I want to note that I commented out the update ingredients function and placed the function back inside the text component. Alright, let's move on. I'm going to minimize the edit function so that it doesn't get in our way. Then I'm going to scroll up to the attributes object. Each attribute can have a type. Add this property to the ingredients attribute. The type determines the data type of the content. If the attribute stores a number, then you can set this to integer. A string is used for text, and you can even use array for multiple pieces of content. We'll be using string. The question is, what's the difference between type and source? The type is for setting the data type. The source is used to instruct Gutenberg what exactly it should extract from the HTML that comes from the database. More on this in just a moment. The next property we'll need to set is the selector property. This will instruct Gutenberg where the data can be found inside the HTML. I'm going to set this to .ingredients-ph. Here's how Gutenberg will interpret this. We're telling Gutenberg, hey, I have an attribute called ingredients. If you're loading the data from the HTML, then you will be able to find the data inside a tag with the class ingredients-ph. I want you to extract the text inside and store the value as a string. It will do this for each attribute. Once all the attributes have been accounted for, it will then run the edit function and render the content onto the editor itself. Something I want to note is that the type property is optional here. It's only required if you're working with metadata, but we're not using metadata, so it doesn't really matter here. I like to set it just in case. I recommend you set it too. Another thing I want to note is that the value we passed in for the selector doesn't exist. We'll be adding it soon enough. For now, I want you to do this for the rest of the attributes. All of them will have a type of string. The selector will be their names followed by -ph, ph being short for placeholder. WordPress now knows where to look for the data. However, it can't look for the attributes since we're not rendering the HTML as we're specifying here. We'll need to update both the edit and save functions for this. We'll start with the edit function. All you need to do is surround the attributes with some span tags with their respective class names like so. To save some time, you can just copy this and paste it into the save function. Be sure to remove the class name attribute from the root element as WordPress takes care of adding it for you. That should do it. Open your command line and cd into the blocks directory. Then run the command npm run dev. You shouldn't receive any errors thus far. Go back to the Gutenberg editor. Remove the block we have and save it. We have to do this since we want to remove the copy stored in the database. Then refresh the page so that we can load in the latest code for our block. Lastly, add the block in again and add some settings. Once you have that set, save your post. If we did everything right, then we should be able to view the post without a problem. You should see what I see. If I were to inspect the element, then you'll see it has all the correct classes and formatting. Just to double check, open Heidi and view the contents of the post. It should be the exact same HTML with the comments added in. Lastly, go ahead and refresh the editor itself. The block should be displaying just fine with the data saved. Congratulations! You just created your first block. It took a long time to get to this point, but it was well worth it. Here is our trusty process chart. We've prepared the environment, enqueued the files, registered the block, created the settings, and rendered the block. You will want to make sure that the block renders perfectly on both the front and back end. I've added an extra step here, which is optimize and enhance. In the next few lectures, we'll take a look at how we can improve the user experience by styling the block and adding additional settings. When you're ready, I'll see you in the next lecture.